The red and blue lights flashing through the living room window were blinding. I was 17, pinned to the scratchy carpet of my parents' living room, with a police officer's knee digging hard into my spine. I couldn't breathe, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional knife twisting in my gut. Across the room, my mother was sobbing into her hands, unable to look at me. My father stood like a statue, his face pale with shame. And then there was Julian. My identical twin brother. He stood just behind them, the picture of the concerned, perfect son. I tried to stop him, Mum, Julian said, his voice shaking with fake tearfulness. I saw him hiding the jewelry in his backpack. I told him it was wrong, but he wouldn't listen. I twisted my neck, screaming, that's a lie. Julian, tell them. You gave me the bag to hold. Julian didn't flinch. For a split second, just before the officer yanked me up by my handcuffs, Julian looked me dead in the eye. The tears vanished. A cold, subtle smirk curled the corner of his mouth. It was a look of absolute victory. He had stolen the neighbor's diamond collection, panicked, and planted it on me. As they dragged me out the door, the neighbors gathered on the lawn, whispering. That night, my life as a normal teenager ended. Julian's life as the golden child had just begun. 20 years later, the smudge of grease on my cheek felt permanent. I scrubbed my hands in the sink of my tiny, one-bedroom apartment, trying to wash away a 12-hour shift at the auto mechanic shop. It was honest work, but it was the only work I could get. That juvenile record, followed by the reputation of being the bad twin, had haunted every job application and background check for 2 decades. I was the black sheep, the caution sign, the screw-up. I dried my hands and turned on the small television in the corner. There he was, Julian. He was standing on a podium, wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my car. He was running for mayor. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Julian Vance, a leader for family values. We need to return to law and order, Julian announced to a cheering crowd. I know firsthand the pain of having family members who lose their way. I have supported my troubled brother for years, because family never gives up. I threw the towel at the screen. He hadn't sent me a dime in 10 years. He used my failure as a prop to make himself look like a saint. He was married to Vanessa Sterling, the daughter of the city's richest developer. He had everything. I had nothing but the truth, and nobody believed that. The envelope that arrived the next day wasn't an invitation, it felt like a court summons. It was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with gold lettering. I opened it to find a request for my presence at Julian's 40th birthday gala. It wasn't because he wanted to see me. I knew how Julian's mind worked. He needed the troubled brother prop on stage to show his voters how benevolent he was. A handwritten note was clipped to the back, Ethan, it would look bad if you weren't there. Try to dress appropriately, Jay. My first instinct was to burn it. Why would I go and let him humiliate me again? I paced around my small kitchen. If I didn't go, he would spin a story about how I was ungrateful or on drugs. If I did go, I was his puppet. But then I remembered the speech on TV. The way he lied so easily about supporting me. A cold resolve settled in my chest. I wasn't going there to celebrate him. I was going there to watch him. Criminals, even the smart ones, eventually get sloppy. Julian had been lucky for 20 years, but luck runs out. I took my best suit out of the closet. It was old and slightly tight in the shoulders, but it would have to do. I was going to the party. The gala was held at the Sterling estate, a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and the room smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I stood near the back, feeling the eyes of the town elite sliding over me. They whispered behind their hands. They knew who I was. I was the thief, the bad seed. Julian spotted me and made a beeline through the crowd, dragging a tall, intimidating man with him. It was Mr. Sterling, his billionaire father-in-law. Ethan, you made it. Julian's voice was too loud, performative. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard. Mr. Sterling, you remember my brother, Ethan? Mr. Sterling looked down his nose at me. The mechanic. Yes, Julian tells us you're staying out of trouble these days. I'm doing fine, sir, I said, keeping my voice steady. Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound. We better count the silverware tonight, right Ethan? Just kidding. The group around us chuckled nervously. My jaw tightened until my teeth hurt. Julian leaned in close, pretending to hug me. Don't make a scene, he hissed in my ear. Smile. I pulled back and looked him in the eye. Careful, Julian. You're standing very high up. It's a long way down. He just smirked. The same smirk from 20 years ago. He thought he was untouchable. I needed fresh air, so I stepped onto the terrace. The glass doors were slightly open, and I could hear voices drifting out from the private study nearby. I recognized the gravelly voice of Mr. Sterling and the smooth, sycophantic tone of Julian. I froze, pressing my back against the brick wall. The legacy is everything, Julian, Sterling was saying. I'm updating the trust funds for the grandchildren. But I'm concerned about the medical history. My father died of a heart condition at 50. We need to be sure the boys are clear of any genetic predispositions before I sign over the assets. They're healthy as horses, sir, Julian replied quickly. Too quickly. I want certainty, Sterling insisted. Science. You know I'm a man of data. If the Sterling bloodline is mixing with yours, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Of course, Julian stammered. I'll look into it. A light bulb went off in my head. It was blindingly bright. Julian was terrified of a medical check. Why? We were identical twins. Our DNA was the same. If he was hiding something in his blood, or his history, he couldn't hide it from science. And Mr. Sterling was obsessed with lineage. This wasn't just a chance for revenge, it was a weapon. Christmas arrived 3 weeks later. The family values candidate couldn't refuse a family gathering, so I was allowed into the mansion again for Christmas Eve dinner. The tree was 12 feet tall, covered in gold ornaments. Vanessa, Julian's wife, looked tired but beautiful, her 2 teenage sons playing on their phones on the sofa. After dinner, it was time for gifts. Julian handed out expensive watches and designer bags. When it was my turn, I pulled 5 small, rectangular boxes from my bag. I handed one to Vanessa, one to Mr. Sterling, one to each of the boys, and finally, one to Julian. What is this? Vanessa asked, tearing the paper. Ancestry and health DNA kits, I announced, loud enough for Mr. Sterling to hear. I heard Mr. Sterling mention he was interested in the family medical history. Since Julian and I are twins, I thought this would be the perfect way to map out the entire family tree and check for any health traits. For the legacy, the room went silent. Mr. Sterling beamed. Excellent idea, Ethan. Truly proactive. Julian looked like he had swallowed a rock. His face drained of color. He stared at the box in his hands as if it were a bomb. That's very thoughtful, he choked out. But is it secure? These online databases. Nonsense, Sterling boomed. We'll do it tonight. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Julian. He didn't even say hello. You need to cancel the kids, he snapped. I looked into the company. They have privacy issues. I'm a public figure, Ethan. I can't have my DNA floating around on the internet. It's a security risk for the campaign. I sat back in my chair, taking a sip of coffee. Relax, Julian. I set the privacy settings to maximum. Besides, Mr. Sterling already mailed his and the boys' samples this morning. I dropped them at the post office for him. You what? Julian screamed. His voice cracked, losing all its polished composure. You had no right touching my children's mail. I was just being a good uncle, I said, my voice calm. Why are you so worried? We're identical twins. My DNA is your DNA. If I'm not worried, why are you? Unless there's something you don't want Mr. Sterling to find out. There was a long silence on the other end. Heavy breathing. You're playing a dangerous game, Ethan. You're jealous. You want to ruin me. I don't have to ruin you, Julian, I replied. I just gave you a Christmas present. The truth is a gift. He hung up. I knew then that I had hit a nerve. I just didn't know how deep the rot went. I knew Julian would try to cheat. He was a fraud by nature, he couldn't help himself. He would assume that since I bought the kits, I wouldn't see the back end of the process. But he was wrong. When I purchased the kits, I registered the serial numbers to a dummy email account I controlled. I could track when they arrived at the lab. I also did something else. I submitted my own sample separately, under a pseudonym, John Doe. This would serve as the control. Since we were identical twins, my DNA should be a 100% match to Julian's, and it should show up as a parent match to his children. A week later, I got an alert. Julian's kit had been flagged by the lab for insufficient sample. He had sabotaged his own swab, probably dipping it in water or bleach, hoping to buy time. But he couldn't sabotage the kids' samples or Vanessa's. Those were already processing. He thought he was clever. He told Mr. Sterling, oh, mine failed, I'll have to retake it later. He was stalling until after the election. But he didn't realize that he didn't need to provide a sample for the secret to come out. I was his identical twin. My sample was already in the system. I was the baseline. 6 weeks passed. The email notification popped up on my phone while I was changing the oil in a sedan. Your results are ready. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I wiped my hands on a rag and unlocked my phone. I logged into the dashboard for the John Doe account, my DNA. I clicked on the DNA Relatives tab. I expected to see Julian's sons, Leo and Sam, listed at the very top. They should have shared about 50% of their DNA with me, listed as nephew, or, because I was an identical twin, they might even genetically appear as my children, depending on the algorithm. I scrolled down. I saw a second cousin in Ohio. I saw a distant aunt in Ireland. I refreshed the page. Nothing. Leo and Sam were not on my list. I quickly logged into the account I made for the boys. I had the passwords because I helped set them up for the grandparents. I looked at their matches. They matched Vanessa perfectly as their mother. They matched Mr. Sterling as their grandfather. But they had zero genetic connection to the Vance bloodline. Zero connection to me. Zero connection to Julian. I sat on a stack of tires in the back of the shop, staring at the screen until the numbers blurred. The science was undeniable. Julian was not the biological father of his children. This didn't make sense. Julian and Vanessa had been married for 15 years. They looked like the perfect couple. Was it an affair? Had Vanessa cheated on him? If so, this revenge plot was about to hurt Vanessa more than Julian, and that wasn't my goal. I wanted to expose Julian, not ruin an innocent woman's life. But then I looked closer at the boys' results. They were fraternal twins, but they shared no DNA with any known relatives on the paternal side. However, they matched each other as full siblings. If Vanessa had an affair, the father would have to be the same man for both. I switched back to my own health report. I scrolled through the carrier status and genetic traits sections. I had never looked at this stuff before. I scrolled past lactose intolerance and caffeine consumption. Then I saw it. Primary ciliary dyskinesia. It was a rare genetic condition. One of the side effects. Male infertility. I did a quick Google search. Men with this specific variant were almost always sterile. I realized why I had never accidentally gotten a girlfriend pregnant in my 20s. I was sterile. And since Julian was my identical twin, he was sterile too. The pieces clicked together like a terrifying puzzle. Julian knew. He must have known for years. A man like Mr. Sterling would never let his daughter marry a man who couldn't continue the line. And Julian, obsessed with the Sterling fortune and his political image, couldn't be seen as less of a man. He hadn't just adopted. He had used a sperm donor. But he had never told anyone. He let the world believe those were his biological sons. He let Mr. Sterling believe that legacy was secure. He was raising two children who were strangers to his blood, all to maintain a lie. It was fraud. It was paternity fraud on a massive scale to secure an inheritance. I downloaded every PDF report. I printed the charts. I had the ammunition. Now I just needed the battlefield. Mr. Sterling hosted a results reveal dinner a week later. He had set up a projector in the dining room to display the family tree. He was excited, treating it like a corporate presentation. Julian looked like he was about to vomit. He was drinking whiskey rapidly. I sat quietly at the end of the table. Now, Mr. Sterling said, clicking a remote. Here is the Sterling line. Strong links to the British Isles. And here is the boy's connection to Vanessa. A perfect match, obviously. The screen showed the thick blue line connecting Vanessa to Leo and Sam. But, Sterling frowned, clicking the next slide. This is where the software gets confused. It's not linking the boys to the Vance side. Julian, since your sample failed, we don't have your data, but it should have linked to your cousins or distant relatives. It says, no paternal match found. The room went dead silent. Must be a glitch, Julian said, his voice shrill. Cheap internet tests. I told you, Ethan bought garbage. Actually, I spoke up, standing. I uploaded my own data, Julian. As your identical twin. And I don't match the boys either. The dinner ended abruptly. Vanessa took the boys upstairs. Mr. Sterling went into his study to make angry phone calls to the DNA company. Julian grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen, slamming the door. You set me up, he hissed, his face purple with rage. You rigged the data. I didn't write your DNA, Julian. Science did. I pulled his arm off me. You used a donor. You lied to your wife. You lied to Sterling to get access to the trust funds. You don't understand. Julian paced the kitchen, sweating. I did it for Vanessa. She wanted kids. I couldn't give them to her. I didn't want to break her heart. Bullshit, I said. You didn't want to lose the money. Does she know? Julian froze. If you tell her, I will ruin you. I will plant drugs in your car. I will have you arrested tonight. I'm the future mayor. Who are they going to believe? The politician or the convict? They might believe the convict, I said, when the convict has nothing left to lose. I walked out, but as I left, my phone buzzed again. A second notification from the DNA app. This one wasn't about family. It was a red alert from the law enforcement opt-in feature I had left checked on my profile. I sat in my car outside the mansion and opened the notification. My blood ran cold. DNA match found, case file number 88204 State Police. Because I had uploaded my DNA to a public genealogy database, the kind police use to solve cold cases, it had pinged. My DNA, which was identical to Julian's DNA, had matched a sample found at a crime scene. I read the summary. It wasn't a theft. It was a hit and run involving a pedestrian, 18 years ago. A woman was struck and killed on a highway 2 towns over. The driver had fled, but the victim had scratched the driver's arm through the open window before the car sped off. They had skin cells under her fingernails. 18 years ago. We were 22. I was working 2 jobs trying to pay rent. Julian was in his wild phase before he met Vanessa, driving a sports car his parents bought him. The fraud with the kids was bad. But this was manslaughter. By the next morning, the police were at Julian's campaign headquarters. But they weren't there for him. They were looking for a match. And in their system, the name attached to the DNA was John Doe, but the genetic markers pointed to the Vance family. When the detectives approached Julian, he didn't hesitate. He went into survival mode instantly. I watched the news report from the break room at work. Julian stood next to the chief of police. It has come to my attention, Julian said to the cameras, looking solemn, that DNA evidence has linked a member of my family to a tragic accident years ago. As you all know, my brother Ethan has a history of criminal behavior. It breaks my heart, but we must let justice take its course. He was doing it again. He was framing me for a murder he committed. The media ate it up. Candidate's twin brother linked to cold case killing. Half an hour later, 2 detectives walked into the auto shop. Ethan Vance, you're coming with us. The interrogation room was cold, smelling of stale coffee and fear. It felt exactly like the living room 20 years ago. The detective slammed a file on the table. We have a DNA match, Ethan. Under the victim's fingernails. 99.9% probability. You want to tell us why you ran her down? I sat calmly. I didn't panic this time. I wasn't a scared 17-year-old anymore. I was a man with a plan. I didn't run anyone down, I said. The DNA says otherwise, the detective sneered. Science doesn't lie. You're right, I smiled. Science doesn't lie, but it can be misinterpreted. That DNA belongs to me or my identical twin. We share the same genetic code. Your brother is a respected councilman. You're a thief. Who do you think the jury is going to pick? I don't care what a jury thinks, I said. I care what the calendar says. What was the date of the accident? The detective glanced at the file. November 14, 2005. I leaned back in the metal chair. Check my record. The juvenile record my brother loves to talk about. The detective frowned, confused. He opened his laptop and typed in my name. He scrolled back through the years of minor infractions and the big theft charge from my teens. He stopped scrolling. His eyes widened. November 14, 2005, I repeated. Where was I? The detective went silent. He read the screen. You were incarcerated. Juvenile detention center. Serving a 6-month sentence for theft. Exactly, I said. I was locked in a cell 24 hours a day. I couldn't have driven a car. I couldn't have been on that highway. I have the ultimate alibi. The realization hit the detective like a physical blow. If the DNA at the scene was a 100% match to me, but I was in prison, then the DNA had to belong to the only other person on earth with that genetic code. My brother, I said softly. Julian Vance. He wasn't in prison. He was driving a red convertible back then. Check the DMV records. The atmosphere in the police station shifted instantly. The detectives left the room. I watched through the one-way glass as they made frantic phone calls. The narrative was flipping in real time. The golden boy wasn't just a fraud, he was a killer. And the criminal brother was innocent. They released me 2 hours later. They didn't apologize, but they didn't have to. The look of panic on their faces was enough. They were about to arrest a mayoral candidate for murder. I walked out of the station and checked my phone. Vanessa had called me 10 times. I called her back. Ethan, she was sobbing. The police are here with a search warrant. They're tearing the house apart. Julian is gone. He took the car and left. Did you tell them about the safe? I asked. What safe? The one behind the painting in his office. He keeps his trophies there. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She was broken. The revelation about the kids not being Julian's had already destroyed her trust, but learning he might be a murderer shattered whatever was left. She led the police to the hidden wall safe. They drilled it open. Inside, they didn't just find cash. They found a small velvet bag containing the neighbor's diamond earrings, the ones from 20 years ago. He hadn't sold them. He kept them. A souvenir of the day he ruined my life to save his own skin. But more importantly, they found a repair shop receipt from November 2005. A receipt for a new bumper and windshield for a red convertible, paid for in cash. He had kept the evidence. His arrogance was his downfall. He thought he was too smart to ever get caught. The news broke that evening. It was an explosion. Councilman wanted for murder and fraud. I held a press conference on the steps of my apartment building. The cameras that usually ignored me were now zooming in on my face. For 20 years, my brother told you I was the criminal, I said into the microphones. He built his life on that lie. But today, science exposed the truth. The DNA proved he isn't the father of his children, and the DNA proved he killed a woman 18 years ago. He blamed me for a theft I didn't commit. He let me rot in a cell while he lived in a mansion. But the shadow can only hide the truth for so long. I looked directly into the camera lens. Julian, if you're watching, it's over. Julian was on the run. His credit cards were frozen. His face was on every digital billboard in the state. He had nowhere to go. The friends he had in high places abandoned him the moment the warrant was issued. Mr. Sterling had already issued a statement disowning him and announcing annulment proceedings for Vanessa. I went back to my apartment and waited. I knew him. He was a narcissist. He wouldn't flee the country, he would come for me. He would blame me for this. In his twisted mind, I was the villain for exposing him. I set up my phone on the bookshelf, hiding it between two books, and started a live stream to the cloud. I sat in the dark, waiting. At 2 a.m., I heard the lockpick scratching at my door. He still had the skills. The door creaked open. A silhouette stepped in. It was Julian, but he looked like a ghost of himself. His suit was torn, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was holding a gun. You ruined my life, he screamed, kicking the door shut. I was going to be mayor. I had everything. You had nothing, Julian, I said, not standing up. It was all fake. The kids, the marriage, the reputation. It was all built on lies. I needed that money. He waved the gun. I'm taking your car. Give me the keys and the cash you have. You kept the earrings, I said. Why? Because I won. He spat. I beat you. I was the winner. You were the loser. That's how it works. Not anymore. Julian lunged at me. He didn't want the keys, he wanted to hurt me. He wanted to erase the mirror image of himself that reminded him of his failures. I was ready. I had spent 20 years working manual labor, lifting engines and tires. Julian had spent 20 years sitting in office chairs and drinking scotch. I caught his wrist as he swung the gun. We crashed into the coffee table. The gun slid across the floor. He clawed at my face, screaming like an animal. I'm the good one. I'm the good one. I flipped him over, pinning him to the floor. It was the exact reverse of the scene from our childhood. This time, I was on top. I held him down, my knee in his back. It's over, Julian, I panted. Sirens wailed outside. The neighbors had heard the screaming. Or maybe they were watching the livestream. Let me go, he begged, suddenly crying. Ethan, please, we're brothers, twins. You can't let him take me. I can't go to prison. I did, I whispered. I went to prison for you. For a crime you committed. You never said sorry. You never looked back. The door burst open. Police officers flooded the small apartment. Guns drawn. Flashlights blinding us. Hands in the air. I slowly raised my hands and got off him. Julian stayed curled on the floor, sobbing. The officer looked at me, then at Julian. For a moment, he was confused. We still looked exactly alike. He's the one you want, I said, pointing at Julian. The one on the floor. The trial was swift. The DNA evidence, the receipt from the safe, and the recovered jewelry made it an open and shut case. Julian was sentenced to 25 years for manslaughter, fraud, and perjury. I was legally exonerated of my juvenile record. The judge issued a formal apology on behalf of the state. Mr. Sterling offered me a job at his company as reparations, but I declined. I didn't want his pity money. I sued the estate for defamation and won a settlement that allowed me to buy a house, a real house, with a garage where I opened my own auto shop. Vanessa moved away with the boys to start over. I sent them Christmas cards, and sometimes they wrote back. They were good kids. They were better off without Julian's toxicity. One evening, I sat on my porch, looking at the sunset. I pulled out my phone and opened the Ancestry app one last time. I looked at my profile. The data was just code. A string of letters, A, C, G, T. It didn't care about money or politics. It just told the truth. I hit delete account. I didn't need a test to tell me who I was anymore. I was Ethan Vance, and for the first time in my life, the name was all mine.